Hello and welcome once again to MGTracey. Thank you for joining me today. Please, if you get a chance, do like, share and subscribe. Today I've made over 1,000 coffee videos over the last 12 years, and the most frequent question I get asked is, what is the truth about coffee pods? Are they a good deal? Are they good for the planet? Is the coffee better, or are they a rip-off? So how did it all start? Well, in the 1990s a guy called John Sylvan came up with a light bulb moment, How can you make more money out of coffee? We're all happily buying our roast coffee and put it in our filter coffee makers, or just putting boiling water on it, right? Well, is there a lot of money in this? It's very competitive. How could he come up with a market which was just his? And that's where the idea of the first coffee pod came from. The Keurig, the K-Cup, that now dominates the States, but not in Europe. So John, he had this great idea that he would move you from this to this. And this is just a mini drip filter coffee. It just lets hot water drip through, and there's a selection of coffees in there, different brandings from McDonald's to Starbucks, which is very clever. But you had to have a Keurig machine. And actually, he ended up selling the machines for very little money, or even at a loss. 90% of the company's profits were coming from this. And of course, he didn't have it on his own for too long. Eventually, a whole lot of other companies, starting with Nescafe and Nespresso, they quite liked the idea of that as well, and carving out a piece of the market for themselves. So they came up with an even smaller pod to do a really great espresso. And sometimes an espresso machine does, sometimes it doesn't. And they managed to capture that market with the Nespresso machine for a very long time, until the British company Dualit challenged them in court, said, don't think actually you can have a patent on this. Turns out they were right. So what Nespresso did very quickly is they moved to the Virtuo. They come up with another system where, again, they've got a barcode and it spins the coffee. It's unnecessarily really for the flavour, but that gave them something else to protect a new patent, I think for 25 years or so, depending where you are in the world, that nobody else can make the pods. You had to buy the coffee from them. We've got Bosch in Europe who produce the tea disc, and Nescafe also have another coffee machine around Europe called the Dolce Gusta. So they've all come up with different ways. You can see the different selection of machines here: original espresso, Dolce Gusta, and this is a Bosch Tassimo that takes tea discs. Some of them produce really good coffee. Some of them, like the Tassimo, produce a really good looking coffee because they will simulate the froth of the milk and that, putting boiling water through a condensed milk pod. But let's have a look what's actually in some of these pods. So in the States, the market is still dominated by Keurig and their system. Around the rest of Europe and the world, there's a host of other different protected by patent coffee systems, and they all do the same sort of thing. They tend to fire water that is the right temperature under bar pressure, which the Keurig doesn't, it's a drip feed, through the coffee to give you apparently a better taste. Now, to be honest, there's a lot of companies in different markets that use the same idea. They sell you something at a loss, and then they flog you something that's overpriced and very expensive, which is where they get their money back from. You've probably noticed that with your computer printer. The printer itself seems a real bargain, but realistically, do inks really cost $30, $40? No, of course they don't. Or Gillette, or some of the other razor companies where they basically give you a handle for nothing, and then for the next few years sell you really overpriced blades at possibly 10 times what Bic would do for a very similar disposable braid. So it's a common way of doing it, and the coffee guys have got away with this for quite a while, although the number of people doing it has increased. However, there are other little tricks up their sleeve that mean you may not be getting the coffee that you think you are. So what's actually inside these pods? Well, they are very simple technology, and actually that's helping a bit now because it's making it easier for them to be recycled. This is a copy of a K-Cup, so you've got a little plastic lid. Now that is difficult to recycle, to be honest, and then you've got a fairly decent amount of coffee in there, look. and then inside it's like a mini filter coffee, and that's in fact exactly what it is. And water is drip fed through there, the machine makes a hole. And later Keurig machines, they put a special ink on the label as well, so that you had to use all machines. And various people found ways around that by having manufacturers or printing similar inks on the top, or you could just put somebody else's lid on the top of the machine. But that was another attempt to make sure you couldn't use compatibles like this. Actually, Keurig has got into some problems with this in recent times, and they've just had to settle, and I think it was an anti-competitive lawsuit for 31 million. But a lot of companies do this, it's not just Keurig. So the next player onto this coffee gravy train was the Nespresso, and they had an even smaller pod. It's a similar idea, but their machine was trying to mimic what happens in Starbucks a bit more, and it was firing the water through this smaller pod. You can see the difference in the size there, but at a much higher pressure. I think it's about 6 bar or so, and you can see it doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of coffee in it, and that's why you were getting a smaller shot. You know, some of the Keurigs you can actually get a really decent mug of coffee out of that, but you're not going to get out of this one. You're going to have to use 2 shots to do the same thing. And they battled on with this with different Nespresso machines for quite a while, until they too got caught out legally, and then everybody started making them. It's all different types of plastic, aluminium, different brands. In the UK, the #1 coffee company, Costa, they were able to make them. In the States, the #1 coffee brand of Starbucks, they were able to make their own. And Starbucks even have a go at their own machine as well as playing the game with the other formats. But there are other things that came along. So later on there was the Dolce Gusta. So this is another popular machine in Europe now. You can see this one is a Nesquik, and if we go in there, this one is under pressure. It's got a much tougher plastic on the top. Let's try not to cut my hand open. I have got a pretty poor reputation for doing that. This really is, I think, a bit of a con, because all you've got in there is normal Nesquik powder. You don't need the pressure of the machine to go through there to make a hot chocolate. That is just hot chocolate powder. And this idea sort of spread on the Dolce Gusta. So this is a Lavazza cappuccino, and on most of the systems you have a brown pod like this, and you have a white pod. It's that same with that one. It's the same idea with Tassimo, that you have 2 different. You have one that's got milk solids or condensed milk in it, and another one that's got the coffee. But when you're buying these cheaper copies of these brands, so if you're going to Lidl and buying their own version, you will think, oh, it's so good, it was half the price of the actual brand. Well, there's a reason for that. So what should be in a Dolce Gusta pod take that off there, so I'm getting in the way of the camera, and what you've got there is something that is compressing down the coffee powder, and that's something of course that you get that tap 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 when you go to your coffee shop. And then there's another filter at the bottom. Some of these are very difficult to recycle because you've sometimes got foil, you've got food waste, you've got plastic and different types of plastic, and on some of the models some of it can be recycled, some of it can't. I've done a video in the UK that has got the new pod back scheme where all these different manufacturers have got together, and they've come out of a system where you basically drain the water out of the pods, put them in an envelope that's free post, and it gets sent to a special facility that can in fact recycle them. But I would expect in a coffee machine to have ground coffee, and what happens in the cheaper copies of this is the Nesquik idea really. This one is cafe au lait, so a milky coffee or flat white really. What is it? It's just coffee powder. It's instant coffee powder with some powdered milk. I mean, it's not, you don't need a coffee machine to do that, and you'd be mortified if you went to Costa in the UK or Starbucks in the States and they basically gave you a bloody instant coffee. But it's not obvious, is it? The packaging doesn't tell you that. You just think, oh look, I'm getting it for a fraction of the price. And a lot of people are doing that. You'll find that some of the cheaper espresso pods are in fact just instant coffee. And to me, that is such a con. It really is. I might have to change our plates over. So, as many of you know, I actually, most of the time, either use the K-Cup or I use the T-Disc system, which is by Bosch in Europe, German company, or Tassimo is the brand. And one of the things I like about that is it does actually look like a Starbucks or Costa coffee, and they do lots of special flavours, they have lots of brands. My goodness, the price has been going up and the number of pods in the pack has been going down. Sorry, the T-Disc has been going down, so there's been a fairly chunky price rise going on. But there you can see in that one, right, you've got condensed milk. Now when you put the super hot water through that with under bar pressure, you do get something that is very close to looking like a Starbucks or Costa coffee you would have got in the shop. Many people don't like the taste. Personally, it's okay to me. Is it as good as frothing up your own milk? No, of course not. But if you want a quick thing that really looks good, and at certain times of the year, they have special offers, like they'll have a creme brulee one or a gingerbread one, and actually the coffee's always the same. The flavouring's in here with the milk. And then you'd put that in, and the Tassimo system, like the Virtuo, is reading a barcode. That tells it how much liquid to put in, what pressure, what temperature to put it. And although the T-Disc is complicated, or more complicated than the Keurig, it's pretty much the same thing. You've got water going in, you've got ground coffee, a filter system, and the coffee coming back out having gone through a filter. I quite like it. It's my favourite, but you know, everyone has their own favourite on this. And then the last one, of course, the one after Nespresso lost against Dualit and found that they couldn't protect the rights to the little Nespresso pods, they came out with these, the Virtuo. Originally this was very expensive. This was the top end of coffee, and it does look very good. It doesn't have milk pods, it just has different size versions of these that can do from an espresso almost up to a flask. And the barcode is telling the machine when it spins, it's reading that like the Tassimo does, how much fluid to put through there. But this is another great way, isn't it, to protect your patent. No one can copy this one at the moment, therefore they're able to make sure that once you've bought a Virtuo machine, you stay with their coffee. And these things were $200-300 originally. Now they're under £50, under $50. So they are definitely selling the Nespresso Virtuo machines at a loss, and they're going to make it back off these pods. I've also made another video which shows you someone's come up with a very good cheat on this. You can buy these from Amazon or something very similar. This one's called Madama, and these are reusable silicone. So basically what you do is you get your normal ground coffee that you like, the brand you like, you put it in there, you tap it down, and then you pop this on the top. Obviously it was full, it would fit a bit better than that. That's not a very good example of it, is it? If it was full, it would just fit on the top there. And then this, because it can now read the barcode, this will run through the Virtuo machine, but you can have whatever coffee you like, and because you can now fill it with your favourite ground coffee, you're going to save a fortune. And I made a separate video, and there's some links under that video to buy those. So that is the truth about coffee pods. Someone in the 90s had a really good idea on how they could make lots of money, and they did make lots of money. Many manufacturers around the world have copied it with their own patented systems, but they all do a very similar thing. But be very, very careful when you are buying the cheap of the cheap of your pods, because it may not even be ground coffee in there. You're basically just having an instant coffee, and you are buying the most expensive instant coffee in the world. So I hope you found it useful. Please like, share and subscribe. This is Paul from London. I'll see you in the next video. Cheerio for now.